大家周五的晚上好，我是 IvyCompass 的 CEO 索菲亚，今天很高兴跟 Allison 一起 hosting 今天晚上的教育方面的分享和讲座。那么按照惯例，我还是用中文啊，I'm going to use Chinese to make an introduction about AFI and IvyCompass。那么我还是按照惯例用中文先介绍一下我们这个平台，因为可能会有一些新的朋友参加我们今天晚上的分享。今天晚上很高兴欢迎大家来跟我们一起共度周五晚上的2个小时。我们今天依然是会有很多非常好的干货跟大家来共享，来提高我们整体的这个认知哈。先来介绍一下 AFI，AFI 的中文名字叫影响力联合会，英文是 Alliances for Impact。我们是一个501c3在纽约成立的一个非盈利的公益组织。那我们这个平台的宗旨呢，是通过这样的一些知识分享和信息分享来提高整个群体的素质，同时通过这种宣传，鼓励以华裔为主的这个亚裔群体对当地社会的贡献，来增强我们对社会的影响力。那么我们这个 AFI 的组织呢，是由4个不同的平台组成的。第一个呢是我们成年人的公益讲座，有影响力人物采访、金融的和一些其他行业的一些高科技的一些前沿的信息，还有职场的沟通啊，还有包括文艺人物采访等等。第二块平台的这个area 呢，是我们青少年的公益组织，叫 YAFA，是我们华二代他们自己自发组织的一个association。那他们这个association 呢，是通过自己组织的一些大赛呀，还有一些领导力的锻炼，来让我们年轻一代的华二代增强他们的社会影响力及其这个 soft skill 的一些锻炼。第三个这个板块呢是 TCPC，是委员长带领的，很多特别很好的志愿者来做一些对一些特殊需求的孩子和家庭给予一些支持，包括自闭症、ADHD 等多动症这样的一些特殊需要 handholding 多一点的家庭给予一些帮助。那第4大板块呢是生活类的这个板块，如果您还没有加入到我们这个大社区。您可以扫描左边的二维码，这样的话呢，我们就可以请到我们的微信群里头，这样的话你就可以长期关注我们一些好的信息的分享。那今天晚上呢，是大家比较欢迎我们 IvyCompass 来组织的一场分享活动，我们的英文名字叫 IvyCompass，中文名字叫指南针教育咨询。我们这样的一个机构呢，是致力于将北美口碑最好的前藤校招生官，像今天晚上的 John，还有独立的升学顾问。还有一些跟艺术啊、音乐呀，还有一些其他作品集相关的辅导，课程包括 SAT、ACT、AP，还有一些竞赛，包括物理、包括科创等等这些非常好的优质的教育资源，对接给我们全球的华人家庭，因为我们的客户还来自于中国大陆、香港和新加坡以及其他一些国家。另外，因为我们 IvyCompass 是 AFI 来这个大平台支撑的，所以我们还会有一些定制化的一些志愿者的机会和社会影响力的这些背景项目，包括实习，包括科研等等，这些全方位的来给我们高中生在这个高中的4年期间，在他们需要在走这个特殊阶段的这个过程当中需要的所有的支持他们的这样的一个资源，都能够对接给我们的家庭。因为第一，我们的价值观特别看重，在这个过程当中，升学只是一个水到渠成的一个结果，但我们特别看重这个过程当中，如果找对的老师和对的coach、consultant，能让孩子扩宽他的视野，增强他的竞争力，同时还能从不同的角度来思考问题，学习怎么样用这个事半功倍的方式，让自己不但获得了这个成长，同时还把自己整体的那个软实力能够提升。今年到现在为止，我们2025年和2026年的这个申请本科的早申的结果已经是有了。那么今天晚上非常高兴的分享，哈耶普斯嘛，还有这个一些其他的 UPenn、Cornell、CMU，还有这个芝加哥大学，还有 Michigan、NYU Stern、波士顿大学都有我们孩子的身影，非常高兴。今天晚上我相信 John 还会重复一下。就是这里头有其他的导师的这个结果，但是很大一部分也有这样的这个学生的这个影子。他今天晚上一定会跟大家来分享他早申的这个成功在哪里哈。 那今天晚上因为是 IvyCompass，所以我想特别强调一下，我们跟别人有什么不同？因为我相信大家这个有很多的 choice，那我们是一个 boutique 的一个升学的机构。那这个升学的机构，我刚刚也强调了，我们特别看重这个过程，我们希望这个过程能够帮助孩子成熟成长。所以在这个每年，我们是控制我们的学生数量的，我们是只做一定数量的学生，并不盲目的扩张扩大。而这个让质量稍微的这个受一些影响，所以这个是我们第一 number one，我们的 goal 就是做一定数量的学生而控制这个，所以导师也是控制他们的学生数量的。第二，我们的这个升学的这个形式呢是垂直式的，也就是说一个导师在你这个决定之前就能够跟大家。作为一个 interview 啊也好，双向的这个选择，选择好了以后，这个老师会 all the way 服务到申请的这个决定去哪个学校为止，所以中途一般情况下来讲是80%-90%都是不换导师的，所以这个导师可以有足够的时间来 understanding and learn from that student，互相之间都是一个互相这个了解的一个过程，所以到了申请的时候就会水到渠成的去了解哪些亮点是可以在这个大文书 personal statement 上面去用或采用的啊，这个非常非常自然的一个过程。也是刚刚说的，因为有这个 AFI 的平台，所以我们还有一些特殊锻炼的这个机会。嗯，这个我们的 slogan 是不止于升学，而是特别注重的这个个人成长和 soft skill。那我们的网站，如果您还没有关注到的话呢，欢迎您去可以浏览一下。像 John 今天晚上是我们的 feature 的这个 speaker。我们还有 Dom 普林斯顿的，还有 Jason 哈佛的，还有一些Dami 啊、Annabelle 还有 Anne 其他的一些导师。同时，我刚刚 mentioned，如果这个孩子有音乐，还有 server engineer 或者是 photographer，还有 music 方面的这个背景提升，我们都是有相应的老师来给他们这些资源的对接，让他们能够在自己这个 spec 上面能够发挥出来他们最强优势。我们也常说，现在的这个升学不是在找一个 well around student，而是我们在找一个比较有 spec 的这样的一个 student。所以最好的故事就是像今天晚上 John 会分享的是，怎么样让你的故事更加的清晰，主线更加的清晰，从而 penetration 让大家知道你的这个 arrow 是能够一穿到底的，这个是一个比较好的 strategy 哈。那明天预告一下，明天晚上我们有 Hannah 来跟大家分享如何代表美国及加拿大参加这些国家的演讲队。有一个这个现在是 Stanford 的一个学生来跟我们大家分享，首先美国、加拿大国家的选拔的流程啊，选拔的逻辑啊，以及评估的优点和重点在哪里？演讲世锦赛和 NSDA 和 TOC 等辩论比赛不同，是明天晚上的9点到11点，欢迎您继续关注我们的这个分享。那今天晚上特别高兴，又把 John 邀请来。John 是我们平台上面特别受家长欢迎的一位导师，因为他非常的坦诚，非常的 transparent。他有什么都说什么，不是因为你只付了钱了我才告诉你那些干货，他是把所有他知道的东西掏心掏肺的，让我们的学生和家长都能够在不同的讲座当中获得非常多的一些核心的。我相信以往的，如果您参加过这样的这个分享和讲座，都相信受到了很多的这个养分。那么这样今天晚上的侧重点呢，是2025和2026申请季的复盘，以及名校早申的这些趋势。有什么不同？每年确实有很多虽然有一些东西基本面是保持一致的，但是还是有一些趋势和一些不同的 change 和重点会有些 shifting。那今天晚上的这个它的干货里面有一些是学生的材料，因为一般的学生只有7分钟到12分钟被看见，这些材料在看不见学生本人的情况下，怎么样让这个材料你的这个递上去的这些 material 和你的 evidence 被这些招生官们秒懂。第二，在申请过程当中，你的这个 positioning， 你的定位决策非常重要。然后招生官到底权重，到底是学术方面的 research 啊，还有 activity list 啊，重不重要啊？文书还有推荐信，种这些大的板块，招生官是怎么看重，怎么来 evaluating， 怎么 screening 的？最后一个大家都非常焦虑的，Allison 特意放在这边，希望 John 也给我们一点这个方面的这个分享。就是现在大家都在用 ChatGPT， 到底用不用我们成年人工作岗位上在用，很多场景都在用。那学生该不该用？我们的导师甚至于在辅导过程当中，有的时候也会用这些 这些工具，来帮助我们搭建一个比较好的框架。那当家长 panicking，当学生 panicking 来说，怎么搞的？你们的老师为什么在用这个 ChatGPT？怎么你的 feedback，你的这个都跟这个 ChatGPT 一模一样的？那我们今天晚上听一听，该不该焦虑？我们应该怎么样利用好现在的工具？因为现在 AI 你不用是根本就不行，不能跟上这个时代的进步，一定是要用。但是怎么用？怎么合理的用？怎么让大学判断这个 Essay 是不是学生自己写的，还到底是 ChatGPT 写出来的？那么今天晚上我们听听 John 的这个，他从一个前招生办主任的这个 Cornell 的这个角色来，分享一下到底该不该。怎么个焦虑法哈、该不该焦虑？怎么去evaluating看待这件事情？那么大家也看到了，刚刚我说的 John 的这个学生已经被 Stanford、哈佛、Cornell 这个多个学校所这个录取，所以他的这个 methodology，他的这个方法是切实可用的。那么现在我就把这个 floor 交给 John。So John, I finished my speech. I made an introduction for the platform, so now it's yours.
All
So we're
right.
looking forward to hear, 4 points. It's all in Chinese, but I'm sure you'll be cover everything.
That sounds great. Thank you so much, Sophia.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to try and share my screen here for a moment, make sure everyone can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Are you able to see that, Sophia?
Yes, coming now. Yes, please.
All right, fantastic. All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for having me on the platform. Always a pleasure to chat with interested young people and their families. As Sophia noted, I'm John Morganelli. Background is obviously in college admissions. I worked at 3 different schools here in the United States. Most recently, I was the director of admissions at Cornell for the College of Arts and Sciences. I was responsible for all of the final decisions. I hired all of the admissions readers. I set all of the protocols. I even actually wrote the supplemental essay prompt that was used when I was there. The person who replaced me rewrote that prompt, but intimately familiar, obviously, with Cornell University. I also wrote a book called Growing Ivy, How to Crack the Code on Elite College Admissions, available on Amazon. Provides a little bit of insight into my perspective about how you build evidence and how you localize your investigation and what makes you feel authentic. So if you're so inclined, feel free to check that out. And then, of course, my relationship here with IvyCompass. I've been working with them really since I started doing consulting almost immediately after I left Cornell. It's been a fantastic relationship with Sophia and her team, and it's been a pleasure to work with the students as well. Okay, moving forward, just a little bit more background about me. I've kind of noted already, I've worked at 3 different schools. I was responsible for all of the final decisions, as noted. I've been written about in multiple national publications. I'm often interviewed on financial aid and college admissions in highly selective schools. I was also host of the Ivy Plus conference. For those of you who don't know what that is, every 2 years there's an enrollment summit. Basically, all the Ivy League schools plus MIT, Duke, and Stanford. The directors and deans of admissions from those schools get together on one campus. They have enrollment conversations and meetings. We hosted it in Ithaca. When I was the director of admissions, was just a great opportunity to learn about how other institutions do what they do. What are the uniquenesses? What are the similarities? In most instances, there were a lot of similarities. And then finally, I've developed what I refer to as the Morganelli method. Right? There's a set of things that are fundamental to building a story. There are certain ways to presenting that story. There are certain administrative decisions that could negate that story. So the Morganelli method is all-encompassing in that it teaches my team how we go from meeting a student to strategic direction, and what does that look like from an execution perspective. So all of my team is trained the same way, under the same methodology, using the same tools. Okay, let's get into the details. Sophia and her team noted that many students and their families would want to know about early results. So please be aware, of course, that regular decision results have not come out, right? So the regular decision deadline was January 1st for most of the top tier schools, but we do have early decision / early action results. So you can see I had 20 students that were working with me this past year with IvyCompass. Of those 20 students, 12 of them were admitted early, ED or EA, to their top choice school. You can see the distribution of schools, which is pretty typical year over year. Cornell is always my biggest school because of my background. Many students come to me specifically because of Cornell. Stanford has quickly become one of my top schools over the past couple years. Of the top 5 schools in the country: Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, MIT. Stanford has quickly become my go-to school. Many of my students have been very, very successful with Stanford over the past 3 years. Penn is always a big school for me, whether it's Wharton or Arts and Sciences. I get a lot of students that are really interested in Penn. I'm intimately familiar with that school. I was part of their committee-based evaluation process when they started reading by committee. I was at Lehigh University. They invited me down to review their processes, and intimately familiar with the way they do their work. UChicago, Northwestern, those places are always high on many of my students' lists. And then you have some other schools that are maybe a little bit more sparse year over year. Brown, one of those funky Ivies, if you will, unique place, unique application process. Year over year, sometimes I get students that want there, sometimes I don't. BU generally would be kind of, it's a great school, but I would say most of my students are not applying ED there. Sometimes they're applying ED2, sometimes they're applying RD. This student was really, really interested in BU. CMU is a really big ED2 school for me and RD school. But again, I had a student who applied early decision this year. Georgetown does not have early decision, but they have the single choice early action. We've done really well at Georgetown in the past. Harvard, obviously, one of the most challenging schools in the country. I always have a student or two that applies early to Harvard. Generally, we do quite well. You can see 1 for 1 this year. Dartmouth, I consider to be, again, one of those more funky Ivies where a little bit variable year over year as to how many students are interested, but we are, again, 1 for 1 with Dartmouth. So 12 students admitted. We had 5 students deferred, and I'm sure you guys would like to know more about that. Who are those students? What were the schools? You can see the schools right there: Dartmouth, Penn, Cornell, Northwestern, Brown. These are not, so it's not like atypical schools. We had students admitted to Dartmouth, admitted to Penn, admitted to Cornell, admitted to Northwestern, admitted to Brown. We know their processes. We know what they're looking for. In many instances, these deferrals are a symptom of the school group or the area of academia. I think in most of these cases, I'd say 3 out of 5, I was pretty much expecting a deferral. 1 of the 5, I wasn't sure if the student would even get a deferral, so we thought that was really positive. And then 1, I was maybe a little bit disappointed with the deferral. But year over year, I've seen these students who are deferred be very successful in the RD round. More often than not, it's, well, we don't want to have too high of a percentage in early decision, so we'll defer these students. We admit them, a month and a half, 2 months later. They're generally the same students with the same level of interest. I had 7 students deferred last year. 6 of the 7 were admitted to that school in the regular decision round. The 7th student never found out because they applied early decision 2 to University of Chicago. So I expect all of these students to do quite well in regards to the deferral students, these 5. I'd expect most of them to get into the deferred schools and also do incredibly well in the RD round. Deferral is usually good evidence that you're going to do relatively well in the RD round. Now, not every single school is that true for, because some schools defer almost everyone. But more often than not, that's not the case. And being deferred is good evidence that you have a reasonably strong chance both to get into that school in the RD round and also to do quite well at similar schools in the RD round. And then we had 3 refusals. And you can see 2 of those 3 were at UChicago. Very unique year this year at UChicago. We'll get to that in a moment, talking about the way they've changed college admissions. UChicago is what I would always refer to as a wild card school. Sometimes when I have students that are a little bit weaker than they maybe should be to apply to a top 10 school in the country, UChicago is a place that I go often because you get atypical decisions out of UChicago. They have very, very long creative essays that you can choose the prompt. There's no word limit. And so what happens is, because of the uniqueness of their application process compared to a lot of other schools, you get atypical decisions. I would say this past year was probably the worst year I've ever had at UChicago, honestly. Most of my students almost always get in, but they changed their college admissions structure, their application processes this year. We'll talk about that in a little bit in a moment. And then Stanford was the other refusal. The young lady who was refused from Stanford is a fantastic young lady. I would say that all of the other years, every single year prior to this, I think she would have got into Stanford. This past year was the first year that Stanford changed their rules, and they required everyone to report all of their AP exam scores. They never did that before. So it's the first year they required it. And this young lady, almost a perfect resume, almost perfect SAT scores, almost perfect grades, most rigorous curriculum, across the board, tons of engagement, the right academic area, but she got a 3 on one of her AP exams. And when you're applying to like a top 5 school in the country and you get a 3 on an AP exam, maybe you had a bad day, maybe you had a headache, maybe your stomach was bothering you, but that's going to be a moment of pause. Actually, if I remember correctly, I think she might have had 2 3s on her AP exams, which I would say, having worked with her for 4 years, is not representative of her ability. She's brilliant, but it is what it is. And in this year, in this school, it had a negative impact. I expect at the rest of the schools that are not requiring it, which is almost every other school, I expect her to do incredibly well and to earn many, many offers of Ivy League or Ivy-like schools. The 2 UChicago students we'll talk about here in a moment of kind of like what changed as I talk through the 2025 admissions trends. Okay, so just kind of giving you a sense of what I expect in the RD round and for the remainder of the spring/summer. The main thing that I observe here in college admissions is that there are significant budget issues across the country. And it's for a wide variety of reasons. Sometimes it's international student issues where they're not able to bring in the same number of international students. Some of it some schools have had budget cuts across the board because of enrollment. Some of them have had issues with the administration and had budget issues. I would suggest that you are very likely to see a rocky, bumpy college admissions cycle. When I say rocky and bumpy, I mean that schools will not all be acting similarly. You will see some schools that feel like they're in good budget situations, others that do not, and they will function accordingly. You won't know which those schools are until they figure it out, generally in March, April, May period of time. And I think what you're going to see is a lot of waiting list use, right? So schools that are not sure of budget or enrollment, they will waitlist a lot of students, and they will be very thoughtful about how they make those offers. Some of them will start earlier, making offers maybe even as early as mid-April. Others will just take more students than they ever have. The waitlist will be a thing this year. And I would say at schools not in the Ivy League, but just outside the Ivy League, I would also expect you to see some late scholarship offers. We always do every year, but scholarships are just price discounts, right? And price discounts generally, right, there's still a benefit, net benefit to the institution. And so schools that are struggling financially, if they are, and I'm not saying that they're struggling, they don't have money, but I'm saying they're struggling compared to your year-over-year comparisons, that you will start to see some scholarship offers as well. So if you've been deferred, if you have not received your RD decision yet, but and you do and you're waitlisted, if you haven't received a scholarship and you were hoping to, I would say many of those things are still on the table. And that if you haven't gotten a scholarship at the school you want, but you've gotten scholarship at other places, it might be a good year to negotiate. If you got waitlisted somewhere, maybe in years past, you look at those numbers and think, I have no shot. It might be a better year to get off the waitlist than is typical for a school that you're looking at. So keep your head up, recognize that everyone across the country is in a state of flux, mostly because of international issues and the administration issues, and it will change the way enrollment is administered through the rest of this cycle. Okay, I know I talk a lot, I talk fast. Hopefully everyone's getting all of that. If you're thinking of any questions, please feel free to write them down, jot them down. I will have a Q&A at the end. Okay, what did I observe this past year in a little bit more detail? The first thing would be UChicago, right? You saw that they were the two of the 3 refusals I had this year. And UChicago has always been a school that I've done incredibly well. They added ED0, right? Like no schools in the country have ED0, with the exception now of UChicago, which has said, and they've always led the charge. They had ED2 before ED2 was really a thing at most schools. And now they've added ED0, which basically means you need to go to the summer program at UChicago, and then you have the right to apply ED0. And my intel tells me that the admit rates for that specific program into ED0 were quite strong. Students did quite well. Now, the thing about that process is it's unique. They know you. You took classes there. There's evaluations from faculty. They know you in a different way than just a typical applicant. So I see ED0 through the summer program as a powerful opportunity, but also a legitimate risk, right? If you apply, if your plan is to go through this program and you go to the program and you don't do as well, or you don't show as well as you had hoped, Well, it might hurt you rather significantly because they're using that information to make the decision. But if UChicago is a dream of yours, ED1, ED2, no longer as viable as it used to be. ED0 really needs to be in your thought process if UChicago is one of your top tier schools. It can be an accessible place, but it's also ranked 6th in the country in US News and World Report, gets a lot of applications, and you need to be aware of all the different application plans and how choosing ED0 versus ED1 versus ED2 versus EA, which they also have, how that impacts you. Just, side note here, EA at UChicago, when they have ED0, ED1, and ED2, that's like a throw. You're actually raising your hand and you're saying, I don't want you. That's the truth. Now, you might still get in if you're like the best applicant that they have. But if you apply EA to UChicago and you spurn them for ED0, ED1, ED2, you are literally saying to them, you are my backup. You are not my first choice. You are not my second choice, right? And so you got to be really quite strong in order to overcome that. So ED0, big, unique experience this year. I think that you will I don't think this cycle, but I think you'll start to see some schools follow UChicago, just like they did in the past with ED2. You'll see some schools think, hey, this is not a bad idea. We could start a summer program. We could do ED0. So keep your eyes open and peeled for those potential announcements. University of Michigan added ED1, right? That was like the EA school back in the day. And so for the first year ever, they decided we're going to garner early decision applications. Of course, who wants to apply early decision to UMich? The business students, the Ross students, that's who wants it, right? So everybody I know that wanted business was thinking about Ross ED. And again, my intel suggests that a very, very, very tiny percentage of ED students to Ross were getting in. They deferred them. They don't need to take them in ED. They know that's their crown jewel, right? What they want to do is lock up the other areas, the areas that are not their crown jewel. And that's when you start seeing students in the arts and sciences college and undersubscribed programs. That's what they're looking for ED1. So I think a lot of the country missed the boat here. Not that they shouldn't have applied ED1. I mean, if Ross is your first choice, you might as well. But I think a lot of people really thought that was going to be a calling card into Ross. And I think what we saw is it functioned kind of like Wharton. And that Wharton doesn't take that many students ED. They defer them. They compare them all to RD. And that's kind of what's happening at Ross for UMich. Okay, standardized tests, number 3. They're important again, right? Like many of you lived through, maybe you had parents here, had younger or older children who applied to college through the pandemic, right? Standardized tests really took a backseat for a period of time. Everyone was like, okay, we can do this without standardized tests. It's a burden to the students to take the tests. They're not prepped the same way. That was the word. And there has been a total shift, 180, right? Back to standardized tests. MIT kind of started it, and you've seen a lot of schools follow suit in that they want the tests, and they're using these tests to filter you. Especially, and this is the truth, it sounds bad when I say it out loud, but this is the truth. If you're Asian, and especially if you're in a highly competitive area like computer science, pre-med, biology, engineering, things that generally Asian students want to do, they are certainly using the standardized test as a filter function. It's never getting you in, but it's certainly keeping you out, right? So if you're thinking about applying to highly selective schools, I would suggest to you that you start by looking at both tests, SAT, ACT. Which one do I want to take? Take a practice, determine which one has a better fit for you. The colleges don't care. So you want to find whatever's best for you and then take it seriously, because in many instances, they're filtering you at the front end, right? Before they even start reading, they're looking to see what's the average standardized test score that we generally take around here, right? Like, where does this student fall? And then they filter you again on the back end. Oftentimes they make all the decisions and they usually have too many. And then the dean or director of admissions will come in and say, hey, everybody, we need to cut a couple from everyone's region. So you take 5 off, you take 5 off, you take 5 off. And inevitably they say, and by the way, here are the overrepresented academic areas, computer science, biology, right? Just be aware, we'd like to cut from those areas. And so what do the college admissions officers do? They pull up their lists, they pull up the CS students, the bio students, and then they start filtering by SAT score, because they're not going to reread these applications. They don't have time. So let's say, you know what, I'll tell you what, I'll just take the weakest standardized test score out of the CS group or out of the bio group. That's what usually happens. So please be aware, standardized test scores are important, and you really do need to focus on them again. I get questions all the time, number four, about, you read all or you watch the news and you see all of the turmoil at Columbia, for example. And I get questions a lot about, is Columbia going to survive, or are their apps going to fall through the floor? What's going to happen? From my perspective, as long as people are still educating themselves, right? And we're still hierarchy oriented as a society. We want to filter, we want to understand. And so what happens is whether, I don't really believe that if you go to Columbia, you're getting a different biology education than if you went to Lehigh University, right? But people, as they try to organize themselves, they will always have a hierarchy. There will always be a list. There will always be a top 10. And because of that, there will always be a want, a desire to go to the quote unquote more selective, the more desirable places. And the question is, will Columbia fall off? I mean, Columbia could fall a couple spots and you could throw Brown up there and Dartmouth or Cornell or Duke or Hopkins, and okay, fine. But besides just kind of like, moving around a few schools that we all agree are in a certain category, who's going to take their place? Is there going to be a local college that, no one's ever heard of that's all of a sudden going to move into the top 10 and take, or top 20 and take Columbia's place? That's not going to happen. Right? So most of this stuff is noise. I don't think it has any real impact on whether students apply or what the challenge of getting in is. I think, there's stories, things happen across college campuses. The weaker schools, the least selective schools, they're getting less applications because people want to spend their time, their energy, and their resources on things they believe are valuable, that they know or they believe will lead to some level of success. And so the less desirable schools, the less selective schools, they're getting less applications. But the more desirable schools, as much as they're taking a beating in the media, they're getting more applications, and they always have. That's always the way it works. And so, just keep that in the back of your mind. These more selective schools are getting more apps. Now, let me just note, they're not getting more people, right? They're really not, there's not more students. It's just that students are applying to more schools. I don't really think it's gotten any harder, but I also don't think it's gotten any easier, right? It's about the same over the last 5 years, in my opinion. It's about intentionality and strategy and knowing what you're doing here. International school apps. I will say this is an area where we have seen a significant decline. We've seen a significant decline in the total number, and we've seen a significant decline in the percentage of students that are being admitted as international students because of pressure from the administration in the United States. What I would say is that, as it has always been, it is more challenging for international students. There's no question about it. If you take two students, one's domestic, one's living in China, and say which one's more challenging, it's more challenging, right, from China or from any country, unless it's an underrepresented country, because you're competing with the entire international market. Yes, they read kind of by country, but in the end, it's like the international pool is a percentage, and you're competing with the whole world outside of the US. So it's always a challenge. And if you're applying to highly competitive programs like pre-med or bio areas, it's a whole nother level of challenge. I've said in presentations before in the past, when I got to Cornell and I looked at the total number of pre-med students, international, that is, pre-med students who were enrolled, there was zero. There was not one. I couldn't believe it. Where are they? I went to my international director and she said, John, when the students apply to medical school, there's less than 50 spots in the entire country for these students in medical school. And so we are very hesitant to admit a bunch of international pre-med bio students, and then they apply to medical school and they don't get in because there's no spaces. Now, they don't write that in the website, right? As the director, when I was the director, what I've written on the website, like, please be aware, very challenging as an international student to apply pre-med. No, I would never write that because I want them all to apply. I want them all to apply so we can reject them all so that we look desirable. That's the truth. Like, that's the behind the scenes truth. So you got to be aware that they're not telling you, right, all of the details about their applicant pool or how they're making decisions. You have to be aware. If you were to be in 9th grade or 10th grade and decide I'm going to apply as a bio student, as an international biology student, it's almost game over. Like, you're probably not going to get in. So you have to be aware of those things so you don't make poor administrative decisions that significantly decrease your chances of earning an offer. Okay, then we get to the big one. This question comes up over and over and over, the use of artificial intelligence. I'm just going to change the screen here to the next slide. AI. Let me just take a sip here real quick. All right. AI, the question is, right, very simply, should we be using AI for college admissions applications? Let me start off by saying that I am talking about two different things when we're talking about a college application, an undergraduate college application, versus should I use AI while I'm doing my homework? Okay, those are two different things. I have had students, my clients, that have run into some trouble in the past using AI for homework. Okay, so I just want to be clear that I'm not talking about that in this conversation. What I am talking about is on your college application, should you be considering the use of AI? If so, how, and what are the impacts of it? The first thing I would note is that artificial intelligence in the college admissions office, are they using it? I would say generally college admissions officers are starting to dip their toe into using artificial intelligence as part of the review process. When I say part of the review process, I'm not talking about evaluate this supplemental essay. I'm talking about there are some really time-intensive things in college admissions. For example, taking all these different curriculums and trying to orient to it. So, it'd be nice to have AI be able to look at a transcript and immediately be able to tell me what percentage of the total AP classes did the student take, or what percentage of the total AP classes compared to the number one student in the school group did the student take. AI is starting to be rolled out for that type of use, to orient themselves, to organize themselves in application review. That's starting to happen. What they're not using it for is AI detectors, right? Like you could imagine maybe a teacher saying, oh, I gave you a paper and I'm going to take all of your papers, I'm going to run it through this AI detector, and I'm going to determine whether or not you have used AI. Are colleges doing that at the undergraduate level? I would say, based on everything I've heard, every single conversation I've had, that the answer is no, no one's doing it. In my experience in college admissions, whenever we look at a college application, and let's say for argument's sake, I read this college application, the student has D's across the transcript, right? Like they're not very smart, at least based on their grades. Then I read their application and it's amazing, so well written. And I think there's no way this kid did that. There's no way. There's tons of examples of that in my college admissions experience. And for every admissions reader, they've all said the same thing. What happens in those cases? Do they pick up the phone, call the school? Hey, I just read John's application. I see he's not that smart. And this application's incredible. I don't think he did it. We need to investigate. Does that happen? No, that never happens. That would be, first of all, I don't know John. It'd be ridiculous for me to call him, say he's not that smart. I don't know what happened in his life. And I don't know for sure that he didn't do it. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm putting myself and the college at risk by calling this person out. All I need to do is simply refuse them. Okay, yeah, I don't want their grades, or something's not matching in the app. Reject. Maybe I waitlist them. I don't know. But the point is they don't get in. That's what's going to happen here. Let's say, for argument's sake, that you use AI, and say you use it so poorly that the first second someone reads it, they're like, wow, feels like ChatGPT wrote this. What would happen? You'd be rejected. That's what would happen. They're not calling your school. They're not calling your counselor, right? They're just simply going to refuse you. Your risk of submitting something that's quote unquote AI generated and you somehow getting in trouble, I would say, is practically zero. I don't want to say it's zero because I don't know 100% across every single school, but it's practically zero. There's one example of this. Adelphi was using AI detectors for grad school apps, which doesn't surprise me because grad school is totally different. It's run by department, right? So now every single department is kind of determining their own perspective on this, and they're setting their own guidelines on this. And what happened? They ran it through an AI detector. They reached out to the student and said, I'm sorry, you used AI, we reject you. And the student's suing them because the student's saying, no, I didn't use AI. The student's parents are saying, actually, we hired somebody to help him write it organically. It wasn't done by AI. And so now there's this lawsuit. Colleges don't want that. There's no purpose to it. So I simply would say to you, you can let go of the fear that you're somehow going to be found out if you use AI. Now, the second part, though, is more important, is should you use AI to get in, right? Like using AI and getting rejected, that would not be of value. What I would say is this. I think that learning how to use AI is a skill. It takes practice. It takes some level of persistence and commitment. I think that you should learn how to use AI. And I don't think that you should say, I don't want to use AI for my college application as if this is some special thing that shouldn't be, you shouldn't be able to use the greatest tool in the history of the world to build up. But I also think that if you use it the wrong way, which is 98% of the apps that I see, the students use AI, I read it and I think this is really poor. In fact, I even think that of adults, when I see college counselors will show me the work, I used AI, I look at it, I think it's really quite poor. I've never seen anyone take a weak idea or a weak concept, put it into AI and turn it into something good. But I have seen lots of students take half-baked ideas that have potential, interrogate them, converse about them, and create depth and details that they never would have if not for the tool of AI. So I would challenge you to learn how to create interesting prompts, learn how the artificial intelligence responds to it, try to determine what you need help with, how it can support you, and think through how to use it strategically. If you just use it like, hey, ChatGPT, help me with a college essay, this is what it's about, I promise you, you're simply going to be rejected. You're not going to be found out, they're not going to call your school, but they're going to reject you. And if you don't use it at all, you're at a disadvantage. Smart people that see the power of this tool are investigating it, are using it, and building something better than they could have without the use of that tool. So I think there's a happy medium. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think that it's a commitment to using it in a, I don't want to use the term responsible because that makes it sound as if it's someone else determining the level of responsibility, a responsible way for yourself. This should be about making you better, more detailed, more substance, more authentic, not less. I hope that helps. And you can see the note on the slide here that even MIT and ChatGPT, they all come out. These AI detectors are they're not reliable. The numbers don't mean anything compared to other numbers of other AI detectors. So rest easy, but also engage. Start asking questions and learn how to use this really quite powerful tool. Okay, moving on. Prospective major selection. You might think when I was putting this together and I looked at this slide, I thought, this feels like kind of awkward, right? We went from this observation, all of a sudden I'm going to prospective major selection. Why are we talking about this? It's one of the most important parts of this process. I would say it is certainly something that differentiates me from many of my peers in college consulting, in that most of them simply say, what do you want to study? And okay, we're going to build this app. There are lots of ways to build an application. And there are lots of ways to get to the exact same spot, right? I could become a biology major by doing 10 different things in high school, right? I could all get me to a biology major when I get there. So I am very thoughtful and strategic around intended or prospective major, because I know that it's one of the few things that you can change that can give you a monster advantage or a huge detriment to your chances. Now, in regards to what that looks like, what I would say is this. The key thing is that your actual major in college, right? You don't declare that generally until your first or second semester of your sophomore year, your second year in college. And because of that, colleges, universities are not admitting you to the majors. They're admitting you to the college type, right? They're admitting you to the engineering school, the business school, or the everything else school, which is arts and sciences. And so what I'm continually asking my clients is, under those big umbrellas, arts and sciences, engineering, business, first of all, which umbrella are we trying to get at? That's the number one question. And then from there, I will give you insights and ideas about what the most strategic way to get to that big umbrella is. And then from there, once you get to that umbrella, arts and sciences, engineering, or business, when you're in school, then you're going to have a chance to decide which one you actually want. Under business, do I want finance, accounting, marketing, right? You can decide that later on. The question is, how do we get you to the business school? How do we get you to the engineering school? How do we get you to the arts and sciences school? And so I spend a lot of time and energy on making sure that I understand all the potentialities of how a student could do it, and then overlay that with two key questions. Number one, what is the total quantity of applications in this area, right? How many apps are we going to get? If I put down computer science versus data science, if I put down biology versus bio and society, if I put down anthropology versus sociology, what is the number of applications that there will be in those areas comparatively? It's important to know, because if you're a reader and you read computer science, computer science, computer science, computer science, even though they're not admitting by major, right? The awareness of, I've seen a ton of these students, that gets built up into you, and you start to have an expectation of what you want to see. On the opposite end, if you haven't seen a major for a day or two, I haven't seen anthropology for a while, number one, you don't have an expectation of what you want to see. And number two, you're wondering, what is this student interested in? Why might I want to admit this student? You're literally looking for reasons because you know that there aren't that many other students like it. So quantity of applications is really quite important. And the second thing is the quality of the applications, right? We can have lots of them. For example, communications has lots of applications generally, but the quality of them is low. What research do we see in those areas? What competitiveness, objective achievement from competition do we see? What's the average SAT score? What's the rigor? Generally in communications, it's relatively low, even though the quantity is high. If we look at neuroscience, right, we see quantity relatively low. People don't just decide willy-nilly last second, I'm going to apply as a neuroscientist. But the quality is high, right? The students who have decided neuroscience, most of them have decided in freshman or sophomore year of high school. I had a young lady, both her parents were neuroscientists, right? The reason they get into that field is because she has an accessibility to neuroscience that a lot of other people don't. So the quality of those students generally is high, although the quantity is relatively low. I'm always looking at quality and quantity so we can overlay that with your interests so that we can find the most strategic pathway to whatever large umbrella it is that you're looking for. Hopefully that makes sense. Happy to answer any questions as we move forward. Okay, I'll finish up here with kind of the value proposition, like why do people sign up, right? What are they doing here working with me specifically? I really believe that this process is part art and part science. I'm very quantitative. You can see in 9th through 11th, there's going to be certain elements that I believe are fundamental, right? We need the right in-school clubs. We need independent inquiry, right? We need the development of a question. We can call that research. We can call it investigative journalism. We need to localize it and personalize it. We need to have tension in our story, right? But I see that quantitatively because these are elements that are necessary, things you need to do, right? And then there's the qualitative side. How do I present it, right? What qualities and characteristics are we going to filter these experiences through? Maybe I'm really detail-oriented. Maybe I'm really communicative. Maybe I have an awareness of stakeholders. There's qualities and characteristics of who you are and how you function that we're going to filter your experiences through. So you have to have the right elements, and then you have to deliver on it, right? So in the beginning, in 9th through 11th, I'm focused on making sure we have the right strategic, intended, or prospective major, that we have a strong research question, a strong wondering, and that wondering is locally relevant or at least personally relevant. I try to make sure it's locally relevant. And then we have contextually relevant engagement experiences. I have the right clubs, the right internships, the right interview questions. And then I can create evidence of this through information sharing. If I write a research paper, has any adult here ever sat down and read a journal, an academic journal? Unless it's your space, professionally, nobody reads academic journals, right? We want to make this feel accessible. How do we engage in information sharing or advocacy so that my neighbor cares about what I said? If I'm a CS student or a civil engineering student, how do I make sure my neighbor cares about the inquiry I engaged in? That requires intentionality and work to make sure your research question is something that they might care about down the road, right? So we're spending time and energy making sure those elements work so that we know when it's time to build your application, write your story, that the elements in many ways build the story for you. And then at the end of all of this, at the end of the 9th through 11th process, we create a portfolio. I use the acronym PAGE, P-A-G-E, and we build the portfolio around that acronym. P stands for perspective, A stands for activity, G stands for goal, E stands for ethos. I always start with G, goal. What's your goal? What's our goal? When we sit down and look at your application and we're building your portfolio, what is the goal? Most of the time, that's an academic major, right? My goal is to apply as an economics student. But we want a more narrow goal than that, right? Maybe I'm interested in public economics. Maybe I'm interested in public economics focused on housing insecurity, right? We have a goal, a G goal, and the more narrow and the more specific, the better. It doesn't mean we can't have 2 goals or 3 goals if we're applying to top tier schools, but we need goals and they need to be narrow. We can find synergies between them, but they need to be narrow, they need to be specific, because that shows curiosity and depth. G, goal. Then we need A, activities that support the G goal, right? Those are all the elements, the fundamental elements of engagement that are necessary. You can't say, I'm really interested in X and have no A activities that support X. So we need to make sure that we have the right activities. Some of those activities lend themselves to essays and interviews more so than others. An independent investigation where you develop the question, where you interviewed the people, where you developed a perspective, where you advocated for that finding, of course, that's going to have more legs, more impact, more diversity in use than if you go to a summer camp and sit in a class where 30 people listen to the same person for a week, right? There's more autonomy, more individual motivation, more perspective development. So A activities are not all created equally. They need to be under the right umbrella. And then we need to think through those different A activities and ask ourselves, what's the purpose of this activity? Is it just context? Is it going to be number 9 on my activity list? Or am I using this in a fundamental way? And if so, is this the right A activity to do it, right? A activities. Then we get to P perspectives, right? If I have a goal and I have activities that support the goal, as I'm engaging in those activities, I'm bringing with me my perspective. It might be just life perspective or it might be relevant perspective. It depends on what I've done in the past, but I'm bringing a perspective with me that impacts the way I engage in the A activity. And on top of that, my perspective is evolving through the activity, right? There's no way that I'm engaging with people, talking, and that my perspective isn't either changing or in theory strengthening. Something's happening. There's an interplay between activity and perspective and activity. You'd be surprised how many students of mine, I start talking about perspective, their eyes glaze over. Why is he asking about my perspective? That doesn't seem important. Why isn't he asking about my captainship or the fact that I was, the president of the club? See, the fact that you became captain or the fact that you became president, that's the output, right? That's the result of your perspective. That's why people put you in that position. But hopefully, I don't know, maybe somebody put you in that position because you're the most popular kid in the class, or maybe your mom's the coordinator of the club, right? I don't know, or maybe your best friend graduated, put you in charge. The thing that makes us believe that you can do this again, that you can add value again, that you can contribute to a community is your perspective. See, I was the president because when I got there, I had this experience. Maybe I felt I wasn't communicated with as a freshman. Maybe I felt ancillary to the organization. And so as I grew in the organization, I started to identify things that could change in the organizational structure, in the way we communicate. And so when I presented that to the team, they thought it was a good idea and they voted me president. Now there's a perspective that led to the presidency. P perspective matters. And that perspective that either evolved or informed, that perspective is what matters. That's the reason they're going to admit you, that perspective. So don't downplay your perspective. Focus on it. Ask yourself, why do I have that perspective? What experiences led me to that perspective? And how will that perspective impact the way I do things in the future? That's P perspective. P perspective, A activity, G goal. The last letter was E ethos, right? And that's kind of like bringing it all together. You can call it ethos, you can call it theme, you can call it brand, but the application itself is a limited platform. Just like an interview is, right? You don't get to go to an interview and say, hey, sit down for the next 10 hours. Let me tell you about my life. Same thing with application. You're not getting to write, except for UChicago, which has no limit on their word prompt. Most of these schools have very, very strict word and character prompts. So you must make decisions about how you present yourself. If you want to present all of who you are not going to do well in this process because you're going to look surface level. You have to decide, who am I? How do I want to present myself in this application? And that's what I would refer to as your ethos, your brand, your theme. Now, you might think, I don't have an ethos. I don't have a theme. I don't have a brand. It requires intentionality to think through it. You do. You do have an ethos. You have a theme. You have a brand. You probably have multiples of them, right? You're a different person in different places, but you have to make a decision amongst all the things I've done, all the perspectives I've have. How do I want to present myself in this platform, in this process? And that's what I focus on in our 9th through 11th pre-application portfolio development. And then we get to 12th grade. Again, that mix of quantitative and qualitative. You can see the first thing on that list, 17 metric college list benchmarking algorithm. When I was at Lehigh University, I spent most of my time working on a yield algorithm that predicted the likelihood of students enrolling. And that's kind of what made my career at Lehigh and got me to Cornell as a director rather quickly. I've kind of reversed engineered that, right, when it comes to benchmarking students to say, Okay, how do colleges make decisions? How did Cornell make decisions? How did Harvard make decisions? Okay, here are the general structures. There's 17 metrics that are pretty common across most schools. Now, how can I benchmark a student, grade a student across those metrics to give them an idea of what the selectivity range should be that they're applying to? And so I've been super successful in identifying for students their chances at different selectivity schools. And I do that through that 17 metric college list benchmarking process. As I said before, I'll create a academic portfolio that's thematic. And then from there, once we know the area of academia, right, we have the portfolio, we have the ethos, we have the evidence supporting it, and we know what area selectivity you can get into, now we're ready to actually build the application. And of course, full support on the personal statement, supplemental essays, activity list, honors list, and the additional information section. I just want to note also that the additional information section, for those of you who don't know what it is, it's what it sounds like. It's the additional information. And most students don't put anything there. They simply say it's additional, and I don't have anything additional to say. I've been using that term, evidence, right? This is where your evidence goes. Oh, you wrote a research paper? On what? Show me. How is it relevant to what you're talking about in your application? You could put the link right there in the additional information section. You could put a short description or abstract there. Oh, you wrote an op-ed to the local newspaper. Show me. Where is it? Oh, there's a link right there in the additional information section. Now, when I read your essays, right, and I see you talking about your perspectives, I can see how they were developed. The evidence is right there in the additional information section of how the engagement, the A activities that were part of the G goal, developed the P perspectives that I'm reading about in the essays. And the evidence of it is in the additional information section. I would say this past year, I benchmark everybody, 17 metrics. But the truth is I could probably just look at your additional information section and have a pretty good idea as to whether you're getting in, because the evidence is the evidence. Does it exist? If it does, and you execute well, you're probably going to do well. And if it doesn't really matter what you write. You're not going to get in because the readers know what they're looking for. So evidence is important, and that section is a focal point for me and my team. Okay, that's pretty much the presentation. You can see if you'd like to follow me on social media, my Instagram, John Ivy Admissions, my TikTok at morganelli.method. Feel free to follow. I post videos mostly from my meetings with IvyCompass. Of course, students are not in there, but just me and my conversations. Check it out. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. You can also see many of my clients have been highly successful getting into college, but that's not my main goal here. I mean, of course I want them to get into highly selective schools, but I want to see students evolve. I want to see them grow into the potentiality that they are. Many of them I see that there's a unique opportunity in front of them, but they don't see it, right? And our goal is to bring that out of them while they get to a top tier school in the process. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time, your energy. I know I talk a lot. I talk fast. If there was anything that was not clear, I'd be more than happy to answer questions now moving forward. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. Very, very good. A lot of content, but I'm sure there's some people maybe not understanding 100% because that's why you're high level. I have to say, if you understand it, you will do well. You will do well by using John's method, going to a top school. But obviously, execution is also very crucial. You can teach 20 students, not 20 students going to Stanford. So that execution, able to understanding what you're saying, able to understanding why you ask them to do certain things, and if they execute it right and able to duplicate those activity evidence, then by joining force together, you can send them the student going to good school. So if you don't understand it, listen to recording, and also maybe ask questions. And then, by your understanding, then your student will do well. Your kids will do well. Okay, I'm going to read some of the questions, and just 1 second, let me share my last PPT as well. I just want to put here, before we answer questions, I just wanted to let everybody see this page. If you like what you hear, if you think John is good, we're talking about match, okay? John's not for everybody. And not everybody also for John. Not all students. I really, truly believe that. If you have a high goal, but same time understanding that level of the knowledge and also the perspective, then it's good match. If you wanted to have a conversation with John, then you can scan the barcode on the right-hand side. right now, John's, I believe, inquiry, it's a small fee. It's a small fee to talk with John. John will give you a lot of information during that session to really individually give you almost like a mini consultation. So you can scan the barcode on the right-hand side, and then somebody from IvyCompass will follow up with you to make sure, answer your questions, and then before we schedule something with John. If you're not ready, you just wanted to kind of, stay put and also watch what's going on. And you can also scan the barcode on the left-hand side. That way you are going to IvyCompass WeChat group. Then you can continue study and learning those similar knowledge. Okay, then I wanted to go to those questions. I think the first question, number one, yes, it's a recording. We will release the recording about a week later after editing, maybe even sooner. If you're in the IvyCompass WeChat group, then you will hear this recording. Okay. So the first question I know a lot of people asking for, it's very typical, but I wanted to have you answer that, is coming from Winnie saying, how important are alumni interviews for Stanford and Harvard? Should I choose in person or Zoom meeting?
What I would say is number one, if you're offered an interview, you need to do it. Right? So it looks really bad if you don't show up to an interview. That said, most of these interviews, including Harvard and Stanford, these are what we refer to as non-evaluative, meaning that they can't interview everybody. They don't have the admissions office doing it. They generally have the alumni doing it. I did this at Cornell. It's like impossible to train alumni to all ask the same questions the same way with the same evaluations. And so because of that, it's what we refer to as non-evaluative. What does that mean? It means that if you do the interview and do a reasonably good job, it's probably not going to help you much. It's just a thing. If you don't show up at all, that would be a problem, right? And then if you do a poor job, it could hurt you because even though they say it's non-evaluative, these are just human beings, right? And so if you come in, you don't know the answer to any questions, you look sloppy, right? Those things are just they're going to be written down. And then the admissions reader can't ignore, I'm going to admit the student to Stanford when the alumni told me they did a horrible job. It's almost impossible to do. So non-evaluative really just means it can't help you. It could hurt you, but very rarely, unless you do a really poor job or don't show up. And whether you do Zoom or in person, I would say really is mostly irrelevant. Assuming you get to that threshold of reasonability, it's not going to hurt you or help you. If you think you could do a better job in person, then I would do it in person, but I don't think it matters too much.
Okay. All right, good. Okay. Rebecca, the question you're asking, I'm not too sure what you mean. So in the meantime, I want to let the audience and family know. If you want to open your mic and have a conversation with John, ask a question directly, just raise your hand. Raise your hand. I will give you permission to unmute yourself. Then you can also, in line, ask a question with John directly. I'm not too quite sure the question. But next one, Chloe. Okay, I think I answered that. She's asking how many students you work with. I think I did already. Okay. From Anne, for the referrals for Harvard, do you suggest to continue to submit additional materials deferred by Harvard or leave as it is? Why do you think they are deferred and they are not good enough?
Well, I think in most instances, additional material isn't going to have a huge impact, but it's also not going to hurt you. I would say if you have additional material to submit, it's not a bad idea. Again, unlikely to have a huge impact either way. In regards to why they're deferred, the thing about EA generally is that when you look at the EA round, you're simply saying to yourself as an admissions reader, is there something unique about the student? Are they literally academically stronger than what we would typically see in the regular decision pool? If the answer is yes, we're admitting them. Or are they demographically unique? Maybe they're from a unique academic area. Maybe they're from a unique geographic area. Maybe they're from an underrepresented ethnicity. Maybe that's changed a little bit with the change of affirmative action, but nonetheless, it still plays a role. So these uniquenesses, we refer to those as institutional priorities, right? At colleges, that's what they're looking for in the EA rounds, or someone who's literally better than they typically get. And if you're neither of those, which is true for like 95% of the students applying to Harvard, they're not unique, right? And they're not academically stronger than what is a typical Harvard RD admit, then those students are just going to get deferred.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay, the following question, I think I can answer that. Kathy Home asking why none of your students apply for Yale or Princeton. that determine it's not they are not apply Yale. I'm sure there's a student, John
Oh, yeah.
student apply Yale, Princeton in RD. It's
Yes.
just a choice by student which school they wanted to apply to. So it's not determined by John's. It's mostly determined by the student.
Yes, exactly. I have lots of Yale and Princeton in the RD
Yeah,
round. Yep.
exactly. And every year, because top five, you're asking very hard. Yeah, the higher Pusima Chinese, right? All those top five, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, MIT, and Stanford are super, super hard. They're in different category. So in this school category, student, generally speaking, they will be applied, similar REA, right? Sometimes REA and also RD.
Yep.
Okay. Um, among John's 20 students this year, any international student? If yes, how their REA results?
I had two international students this year. One was admitted, and one is in that group of deferrals.
Generally speaking, like John said, international students are very, very difficult. Similar category, their evidence portfolio are similar. The local student are a little bit more advantage, right, compared to international student. Okay.
Yeah, in most instances, yeah.
Okay. Okay. For need blind school, will apply for need based FA affect admission due to tighter school budget?
I think it will. I don't believe, I mean, who's checking their need blind, right? Like, these are all schools on a budget. I have heard many, many, many statements from college admissions officers where if you would have heard their statements, you would think that doesn't sound like need blind to me. They're need blind in certain areas, certain parts of the process, but all of a sudden off the wait list, they're not need blind anymore. Or for this category of student, they're not need blind. I would suggest that if you don't need financial aid, that you do not just apply so you can pick up a Stafford loan because some schools are very tight with the admissions office and the financial aid office, and when you apply for financial aid, maybe they see that you have high income and that you're no need, even though you applied. But there are a lot of schools that don't have that tightness, and all they can see is that you applied. They don't know that you applied and basically have no need. So I would suggest that if you have need, of course you should apply because you don't want to, financially cripple yourself to go to college. But if you don't have financial need, you should not apply for aid.
Thank you. 来王，我知道 you raise hand. Hold on a second. Let me go through because some of the questions are listed before during the presentation. So I wanted to answer some of the questions before I go to you. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, just hold in there. And thank you for raise hand. Next one for Vicky. For the standardized test, besides taking an SAT, is it necessary to also take SAT?
Not necessary to take both, but it would be a good idea to take both as a practice to determine which one you want. And then, no, you definitely don't need both. No one's impressed if you get a 36 and a 1600. It's irrelevant.
Okay, only take one.
Take one.
Okay. Next question, asking if 10th grade has several Bs, is it possible he has a chance to enter into Ivy League?
That's a really hard question to answer because the short answer is, of course, most students that go to Ivy League schools have mostly A's, right? That's the short answer. Of course, if we think about the Ivy League, it's rather diverse, right? We could say Harvard and Princeton on one end. I would say Cornell being on the other end is one of the more accessible, still highly selective, but more accessible. And there are some programmatic areas at Cornell, like the ILR school, for example, where we have been successful with students with lower grades. Usually you need to be in a little bit less competitive, popular area to get some B's and still be successful at the Ivy League level, but you can be successful.
Okay. Strategy, right?
Yes.
Right strategy. Okay. The next one, I think also, we kind of answered before, but I'm going to repeat anyway. From IE, I did not see any of your students applying for Duke University. Is it hard to get in? I don't want people thinking you only helping students going to certain schools. So
yeah,
you answer that again.
This was just the EA route, right? This is like everybody who applied. We're talking about one offer, right? All the students that got in that are not committed ED are going to get into a lot of other schools, right? And we're going to have offers from all these places. Duke is a school that, is it hard to get into? Yeah, it's hard to get into. It's a highly selective school. I put it in the same category as Cornell, Johns Hopkins, Brown, Dartmouth. Like that's what Duke is. I don't think it's any harder than the other schools that my students have applied to, though.
Excellent. Oh, this one interesting from Joe. Number one, he said John is the best, which is agree.
That was nice.
Yeah, we agree. Yes, Joe. Thank you, Joe. We were on the same page on that one.
Oh.
Can you share any insights about liberal arts school admissions? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, liberal arts colleges are different in that first of all, if you think about a university, right, generally there are three main undergraduate college types: engineering, business, and arts and sciences. When we talk about liberal arts school, they're just the arts and sciences college, right? There is no business, there is no engineering. That's the difference. Now, what that means is that they're generally a lot smaller. And what happens is in the review process, it is more about community building, I would say, in the small liberal arts colleges it's community building in the national research universities as well. But because of it's more of a business model there because you have three different college types at least, right? And you have all these different institutional priorities that need to be met. And so it does become a little bit more business functioning than a small liberal arts college where, it's all about broad learning. They're not putting students into buckets in the same way. And so now I can really be very intentional in community building versus intentional in community building within the context of the business model that's being required by a national research. So what does that mean? You would get more atypical results, right? So students that you might suspect don't deserve to get into that school might because of the way they're reviewing. And on the opposite end, school students that you might think statistically do deserve to get in or may not get in because of the uniqueness of the way they're community building. I would say, just like in all things, there's opportunity and risk associated with applying to those schools. You got to know what you're doing. You got to know who those readers are and what they're looking for as compared to a national research. They are very different.
Thank you, John. Okay, Faye asking, what is ED0 and ED1? Can you explain it briefly? I think maybe.
Well, ED0 never existed before. It's brand new. It started by University of Chicago, and it was just it's a business tool, right? UChicago is a business, and they asked themselves a question. They said, how can we get students even earlier to commit to us? So they don't even think about Harvard. They don't even think about Princeton. They're not even in that conversation. How do we do that? We could have them come to a summer program, and we could, tell them that this summer program gives them an opportunity to apply ED0. That's basically what it is. It's just a pipeline for students that might be interested in UChicago and UChicago's idea of locking them in as early as possible so that they don't start to look at all the other places. That's what it is. Many other schools don't have it, but I would expect that you start to see a couple schools add it because they'll say it seemingly works well for UChicago and we'd like to lock up some good students too. But it's atypical right now.
Yeah, only Chicago have ED0, no other school.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. The next one a little bit long. From the common application awards section, is it necessary to fill all 5 award slots, especially for MIT, which allow up to 5 academic and 5 non-academic awards? What should be done if there are no formal non-academic awards, but they are substantially non-academic activity without official awards?
Well, I mean, there's 2 kind of separate questions here. On the Common App, right, you're applying to all these schools. MIT has their own app. I mean, I would say if you're applying to MIT and you don't have any achievement, you're probably not getting in. I mean, that's the truth. Unless you're a very unique individual, applying. I'm a female applying to a very underrepresented area, maybe. But otherwise, if you're applying to a typical area at MIT, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, MIT are the places you kind of need some achievement to be successful. Or you need to be very interdisciplinary and have a lot of substance in multiple areas. I would say generally, though, for Common App, you can be very flexible with what those honors are. I mean, many of my students will put down publishing a paper. Is that an honor? I would say no, not officially, but they'll put it down. Do you need to fill out the 5 spaces? You don't need to. You can be successful without filling out all 5, but it would also be detrimental if I read an app to an Ivy League school and there was nothing in the honors section because most of your competition has some honors. So I would tell you, you can be flexible. I've put op-eds, I've put research papers, things that are clearly not honors, I've put in the honors section before. I don't feel the need to put silly things there just to fill them up. But, you got to go out of your way if you're applying to a top tier school to compete with your peers, and they're going to have some honors. So, you got to go through everything you have, ask yourself, could it be an honor? Yes or no? If you're younger, you should try to add some honors. But if you're applying to MIT, but if you're not, then you got to go through and ask yourself, what could I put here and what is reasonable? I think you will not do well with nothing there.
Okay, thank you. I skipped a couple one. This one is neuroscience a hard area of application within biology or the most difficult area to get in? Thank you.
Well, do you say, is it a hot area? Is that what you said?
Neuroscience, very hard area application.
Hard area.
Yeah,
I mean,
she's asking you.
I would say like, first off, if you take the STEM, right, we just say, okay, STEM areas, the natural sciences, right? Those are always going to be challenging areas across the board. Now, if you said to me, John, right, like we could do bio or we could do neuroscience, right? Like I would take neuroscience mostly because it's more narrow than biology, and I'm not competing with every single person who's ever thought they might want to become a doctor, So at least I have like a little bit more narrow. Is it going to be a competitive area? Yes, because as I noted before, people don't just randomly decide neuroscience. They've done things to make them believe that they're interested in neuroscience, and that creates a bar of expectation because the readers read the same stuff over and over and over, right? Like, dementia, Alzheimer's, right? Like all the kids are doing that type of stuff, right? So if you don't have that type of stuff or something to fill that, then the reader recognizes that because they've seen it so many times. Whereas in other areas that are less prescriptive in what you need to do, you can get away with having less and still be relatively successful. I would say neuroscience is a challenging area, but I would say, like I'd rather do that than biology. Would I rather do that than chemistry? I mean, I would say it's probably about the same and depends on the student,
Okay. S1, you wanted to know the fee and also how often you're meeting with the student. Can you maybe add a WeChat of myself and also Allison? We'll be happy to answer that question for you. It's not just one sentence, but we would like to chat with you to give you that information. Thank you for that question. Okay, next one from SL. If a student is interested in biology, computational biology, but also strong in physics and chem, what is your recommendation for prospective major? What area activity would you suggest the student to do to demonstrate that?
It's a really hard question to answer without knowing the student. I mean,
Yeah.
my gut tells me, it would be a lot easier to go physics, especially, I don't know if this is a female. If it's a female, I'd definitely go in physics over biology. And I mean, females in physics and chemistry would be reasonably stronger than bio or computational biology. In regards to what you need to be doing, the thing that you have to understand about the STEM spaces, the readers, most of these readers, they don't come from these areas, right? Like you don't have a chemist sitting there or a neuroscientist sitting there reading your application. They're humanities people. They're social science people. Most of what you write about your research in, computational biology or physics, most of it will go over their head. They won't really understand exactly what you're talking about or how much of the motivator you were, especially if you're doing research in a group. What happens in these areas is the readers lean into achievement. They're like, okay, you're great in this area. What happened at Regeneron, ICEF? Tell me, did you submit your work for publication? If so, where? So what I'd be saying is if you're going to apply under these hardcore STEM areas to top tier schools, in addition to having a narrative and a story that I help build, you need to put yourself in positions to potentially be successful in competition. And for most students, that means hiring a mentor that's going to support them through Regeneron, support them through publication, support them through those things so that we have some foundational achievement on the record. Quantitatively, we can just kind of look at it and see it. And now my job in many of those instances is to take that and turn it into something accessible and digestible by someone who doesn't actually recognize that space. If you read enough essays, for example, about neuroscience, like they're all talking about the same thing. The research they did in Alzheimer's, dementia, it feels like noise. The readers just kind of eyes glaze over. How can we make that interesting and accessible in a different way? If we do that, we will be successful, but not if we don't have any achievement on the record, right? Like they still want to see that you have an ability. And then if you make it accessible and digestible, you can be really successful. What should you be doing? Start with summer programs that are highly competitive. Hire a research mentor to help develop a really interesting question. Ask whether that question has a potentiality for competition or publication. That's where I would start. And then I would say, let's sit down and talk about how do we localize, how do we personalize, how do we build the narrative side, but you got to have the quantitative side on the natural sciences first, from my perspective.
Okay, thank you. I think it's 10, almost 10:30. So I'm going to open mic for like one or two, but there's so many questions. There's a 47, I see new questions. If we don't have a time to answer your questions, scan the barcode on the right-hand side. That way somebody will follow up with you. We can answer a lot of questions besides John, because we work with John for so many years. A lot of questions you're asking for John, we are able to answer. Me and Allison and IvyCompass team, we are quite good answer some of the questions. Obviously, there's a question we cannot answer. We will tell you it's better to ask John. So let me give you this question. We know this question is really interesting, but I want to hear from John's perspective. What kind of student will be good fit for John? I we kind of know me and Allison. We often know, by company and working under you. But what do you think? I want to hear from you. You're saying what kind of student you work well, have a better
Well,
result.
well, let me first say that what Sophia just noted is that I do have a very close relationship with Allison and Sophia, and I will give you, Sophia and Allison, a ton of credit that you've sat in probably on, I don't know, hundreds, maybe I mean hundreds of my meetings now. And so, they really do know what I'm saying, my process intimately. So, I would highly encourage you to chat with them. As relates to like who would be good to work with me, um, people who have goals, right? Like number one, a young person, and this is not a negative statement about a young person who doesn't have clear goals yet. I think as a young person, when I was in freshman high school, sophomore, I didn't have clear goals, but some students do. And that goal is I want to get to a highly selective school. That's kind of necessary. I mean, we've had a couple students that maybe that wasn't their goal and their parents forced them. But, more often than not, those are not the best working relationships between the students and parents, and even between me and the student, because the student doesn't have the want. I would say that's number one. And I don't see want like I have to go to Harvard, but want to achieve at a level that's a little higher than I think I could do on my own. And so I'm willing to put time and energy into the relationship. That relationship means, what does that relationship mean? It means when I send something, you got to read it. It's easy not to, and I don't blame the students. Sometimes it's like, okay, that's a lot, but I'm sending it because it's fundamentally necessary for you to know, for you to make a good decision. And I know there are some instances where people are tired, and right, and that happens. But I think you got to have a wantingness inside of you to achieve something a little bit greater than you might have on your own. That would be the first thing. And then the second thing is, you probably can tell just from my tone, I have a strong personality. I like to challenge. I like to push back. I like contrarian perspectives. And I think for most students, that's really a good thing and needed. But I also recognize that for some students, they're not used to it, and it can feel a little scary, right? Like, wow, this takes a lot of time, not time, it takes a lot of energy for me to be in a call with John because he's asking me these questions. He's asking me why I did this or why I thought that. And, I think for many students, that's a little bit of a culture shock in the beginning. But as a whole, the students that I work with, I see incredible evolution. I see people become the best versions of themselves. And I really enjoy challenging them to see where they can get without I don't want to just tell them. I like them to find it through inquiry, through conversation. And so I think for some people, they want to be handheld a little bit more. We still handhold, right? That's what the associate counselors are there for. Sophie and Allison will help you and talk to your family and handhold. But in my meetings with you, I do want to challenge you. Like that's just kind of the way I function.
That's why in the beginning I said that's why we're working so well together. We are obviously a college application business. We're helping kids going to the dream school, but at the same time we emphasize through that experience of 3 years to 2 years or 1 year. We're hoping by working with a consultant like you, like John, intelligently challenging the student to make them see different angles, different perspective. Then the kids, we see them transformed. That's why we emphasize, we as a team are very focused on that process. The time spending to learn from John, there's a better way of doing things. There's strategy to doing things to achieve a higher goal for you personally, not just for college application, even for career, for future like adulthood, and promotion, asking for money, asking for salary increase are all good learning by your method. That's personally I feel.
Thank you, Sophia. And I'm seeing now, right, like students are now graduating from college that I started with as freshmen in high school. And many of them are hiring me for graduate school and for jobs because, they saw what I did with them. Not that I got them in. They saw how I positioned them and changed their perspective. And they're like, okay, let's do this again. How can I position myself uniquely as compared to my peers applying for that job?
Absolutely. Okay, I just opened the mic. Let me, before going to the chat box, 来王,
Oh,
you
hi.
can talk now.
Thank you. Thanks, John, for this informative webinar. I just have a question regarding the interview. Earlier, you mentioned that interview is non-evaluable, which won't increase the opportunity to be admitted, but may have negative impact. So, do you recommend the students do having an interview or just reject it in the application in the first place?
Good question. I mean, in most instances, you should still do it because just simply saying no has a very negative connotation unto itself. Like, oh, look, they were offered an interview and they decided no, they wanted to watch Netflix that night instead, right? Like that just has a really negative connotation. That said, I mean, I have had some students that I worked with where I've gotten to know them and I can really very much appreciate who they are as individuals. But I have this anxiety that like in a 30-minute meeting that maybe they won't show who they are in the way that they could, and then it might be detrimental. I've had some students like that, and I will say that I have made recommendations to some few students that either we need to put a ton of effort into this or you should not go. And in most of those instances, the student and their parents were like very aware of that. They kind of knew that their interview skills or their social skills were not really their calling card. And some of them we worked with them, and others they decided not to do the interview. But let me just add one other thing. One of the problems with this, like this idea that like, well, I'm just not socially strong, and so like I'd struggle in this interview, is that in my experience, those students, remember, we're not the only ones talking in the app. There's letters of recommendation as well. And so in my experience, those students that I kind of identify that might be that, I am pretty confident that their letters of recommendation are also not as strong as they could be because of that. So there's like a few things that are happening that are negative when you don't have the social communication skills that are necessary to execute. But once in a while, there's a student like that I'll say like, okay, yeah, let's hold off the interview because I can't see how this could help you.
Oh, so John, you mean when you're consulting students, you will recommend they either apply for an interview or not? Is that right?
99 out of 100 are doing the interview, but I've had at
Oh.
least a couple students that, I mean, I had one this year, honestly, that was like, and his mom came to me and was like, what do you think? This is my concern. And, her concern was exactly my concern. We had a very honest conversation around it, and he decided not to do the interviews.
So for those doing interviews, what's the benefit for the interview then?
The benefit is that you don't have a note in your file that says you didn't do it, right? Like that's the benefit. Like I did it. They offered it to me. And I did it. That's the only benefit.
I see.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Okay, next for TJ. TJ.
Hi, yes, thanks, Sophia, and thank you, John, for sharing your wisdom. For a student that has special needs, say high functioning autism, well, that's a female, so she can mask herself. She has anxiety, high functioning autism, ADHD, but she's been very diligent. She's doing well academically. Now, in the process, when it comes to the application, should you disclose that? Is that going to help or hurt? And if you are going to disclose that, what's a good way to put it in a positive light so that when there's an interview, the interviewer sort of understand that, okay, so she's going to be probably a little shy and may not be able to articulate some of the things that she knows, but just not very good at expressing herself. You see what I'm saying? Just trying to, so this is her angle, but she will do well academically, but she wants to be able to show, kind of, this is her and, her whole package.
Are you talking about in the application or in an interview?
In both, if you could.
I mean, I think the interview obviously makes it a little bit more challenging of a conversation because I'd have to get to know her and figure out how she would want to present herself and what she's comfortable with. But as it relates to like the application, I think you hit the nail on the head immediately. You said, how do we present this in a positive light? But then when you talked about it, you said, but how do we get them to recognize that she might be X? And then the things you noted were a little bit more on the negative side in theory, like, oh, she might not be, maybe a little bit more shy, right? Not that that's negative, but kind of the portrayal of it. What I would say is that you really want to lean into the positivity of this. It's not how did she get by? It's what superpowers does she have? You know, there's something about pattern recognition. There's something about the depth of focus. There's something about the independence from the typical social script. There's something about honesty and precision. There's something that makes her highly likely to contribute something of unique value. I'd be leaning into that hard. I had a young man who, you know, he had Tourette's, and you know, he basically asked me the same question. Should we? And it was like, no, we built everything around that, right? And it wasn't that it was a superpower that there were no challenges. Of course there are, but what's the result of those challenges as it relates to a positive contribution to the community? And if you can deliver that well, it can be really strong. Now, I would say in some instances, you know, if there's talking more generally speaking to the audience, if we're talking about like mental health issues or stuff like that, there are some things that I would not go out of my way to disclose. I had a young lady, very, you know, she had a eating disorder issue. She worked really hard and went to a lot of therapy, and she came out on the other side. She's a wonderful, beautiful human being. And she really wanted to write about that. I was very hesitant, even though it was very obvious to me that this young lady, well past this, on her way to amazing things, you know, they don't know her. And there's a drain in resources sometimes at colleges and universities. They talk about it all the time. And so, you know, identifying things like that could have a negative impact. But I think more often than not, any challenge that we're dealing with that, you know, we're trying to highlight as something that is incredibly positive as it relates to the potential contribution.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So was it, so in the case that you work with, what was the outcome if you should, or any students that have special needs and so forth, and, you know, were they somewhat successful in getting into the top schools? We're talking
Yeah, I
about
mean, very, very successful, actually. I mean, the one that I was just talking, not that it's the same thing, but the young man who had Tourette's, I actually had all his brothers. There were 3 brothers. And the first young man, he's at Cornell. His brother applied to Cornell and got deferred out of ED. And the first thing he said was, man, I got screwed because I don't have Tourette's like my brother, because you built that whole thing. That was the first thing he said. And, you know, and it sounds silly but he was observing something. He observed that that there was something fundamental to that app that we built around that he doesn't have. That challenge didn't allow for the contribution. And so sometimes there's an opportunity in that challenge.
Mm-hmm. Great. And he's doing well at Cornell, right?
Oh yeah, he's doing really well. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, TJ. Okay. Tong Ling, hold on. Okay. Let me go back to the chat box for a little bit, and then I come back to you. Just hold on for a second. Just, you know, wait for me for a second. Okay. Next question from Tao is, can love letter move needles? How about additional recommendation letter?
It's kind of like the interview, right? Like you got to do it, because if you don't send the letter, it looks like you're not interested anymore. So it's something you must do, but it doesn't really move the needle in a positive direction. It's like, if you don't send it, it will go in a negative direction, but there's really nothing that you're going to write in that love letter generally that's going to move the needle. It's more about timing and luck. And that's the truth. Now, strategy would be that your college counselor is advocating on your behalf and reaching out to the school and doing those types of things. So the love letter, not going to have a huge impact. There was a second part of the question. Sorry, what was it, Sophia?
Just is any additional recommendation letter will help, almost like that.
I would say, again, in 98% of the cases, no. Now, I wouldn't say no letters of recommendation could help. I mean, are there people out there that in theory could move the needle? You know, a board of trustee member or something that you didn't think of at the initial stage. Some of those times, those people, if you're deferred or waitlist, those letters can sometimes have a little bit of weight. But just a typical, like, hey, my head of school wrote a really impressive letter about me. Again, 99% no. It's more about the, you know, for the deferral group, you're going to get looked at very significantly compared to the RD group. So I wouldn't be too worried that you're not going to get a review. On the waitlist group, then it's usually kind of categorical luck, right? Like, okay, no one's allowed to take any more natural science students. They need to have above X SAT score. And now it's just like, if you meet those criteria, you're in the conversation. So it's a little bit of luck. They're really not, even at the deferral or the waitlist stage, it's really not a qualitative review where they say, Sophia spent her time doing this the last 6 weeks and John spent his time doing that the last 6 weeks. They don't really do that.
Okay, good. Okay, next one, asking Rebecca, if we plan to apply for medical school, how helpful would attending an Ivy League school can be?
I would say, listen, going to a top tier school is always helpful, So I mean, I would certainly try to do that. But I would say the number one indicator for medical school is your MCAT score. I mean, that's the truth. So I'd be focused on making sure that I'm prepping for MCATs and that my GPA is really quite high at the undergraduate level. But the third thing, right, be MCAT 1, GPA 2, and third thing would be the school I attended as an undergrad.
Thank you. Okay. Crystal Wang, if you want to know the price, come in, talk to me, scan the barcode on right hand side. Either me and Allison will follow up with you and we can talk to you about that. Okay. How was your experience and result working with a Canadian student?
Well, I have some great Canadian students that I love. Canada is a challenging place because, well, first of all, the students that apply from Canada, like, I don't know if you guys know who Mr. Wonderful is, right? He's from Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful, the entrepreneur, right? He's Canadian. His daughter goes to McGill or went to McGill, right? Like, people don't leave Canada because there's some really good schools there unless they get into like the top schools in the US. So a lot of my students that are applying from Canada are saying, I'm applying to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, MIT, and basically the Ivy League. And if I don't get into those schools, I'll take one of my Canadian schools. So, of course, so you're talking about like a ratcheted up group of competition. And then I think as an Asian student applying from Canada is a challenge because, there's domestic students, obviously, who are Asian. You have Chinese students from China that are Asian. And so like kind of taking them from Canadian schools sometimes is a little bit more of a challenge. I would say that there's probably like 15 to 20 high schools in the country in Canada that like the Ivy League basically takes most of their students from. So you got to be at one of those high schools. But the Canadian educational system is really good. I mean, outside of the top 5 and maybe the Ivy League, I think most of my students are getting into a lot of schools, but a lot of them don't go, right? They say like, I'll just stay in Canada. So a lot of them are focused on the top 10 schools in the country, and we have mixed success there. I'd say 50-50 is usually kind of like what happens. Some of them are able to pull it off, and some of them, are not able to pull it off. And it's dependent upon what high school they went to and where they are in their high school group generally.
Okay. Next one, Tong Ling. I opened the mic so you can talk now.
Great. Hi, John. Good to see you again. So we have been spending the last year exploring what she wants to do. At least we found out very clearly what she doesn't want to do is she doesn't want to do any STEM majors, even though she's really good at math and science. So now we're helping her to explore humanity majors. But so what do you recommend humanity majors that's good for someone who is actually good at math and science also? So she's not just a traditional, typical humanity majors.
Well, we don't like, I mean, of course, many of the social sciences, right, have quantitative aspects to them. So you could look at, a sociology or a psychology, it's kind of in that middle ground. But you also could just kind of diversify and say, like, well, we're going to do a data and information science oriented aspect. And then I'm going to also, like, I've had students do data and information science with linguistics. I've done, so like, and it usually starts off kind of separated, right? Like, here's my STEM focus, here's my humanities focus. But because there's so much overlap, and if you're intellectually flexible at all, you can usually find that synergy. So I would say, you could go middle ground, sociology, psychology, kind of like, or you could say, I'm going to lean into a STEM area. I'm going to lean into a humanities, social science area. And then I'm going to kind of build them out separately and then look for the synergy between them. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, we sign up for IvyCompass summer program camp. So she still have that this summer to explore before she starts high school. What would you, how should we think about this? What would you recommend for her to continue exploring in this area, finding her path and interest?
Well, in my experience, like what I do with my students when they're trying to figure out what they're interested in is I draft them questions, right? I'm like, okay, tell me what you do. All right, you're interested in X, Y, and Z. And I start to give them like potential research questions and potential, you're interested in STEM, you're interested in humanities. What if I put these two things together and I show you a question related to data science and sociology, right? And I give them a question related to something that they actually do. So look, you volunteered in a nursing home. All right, I can come up with a question that combines data science and sociology. Do you like that question? How does that compare to the one that combines data science and anthropology? Or how does that compare to the one that combines statistics and psychology, right? And so now through questions about common experiences, their own experiences, they can say, I can see how that question's different than that question about something I've done. And I kind of prefer that one. That's usually the best indicator to me of going in a certain direction, as opposed to sending them to a program and asking, did you like it? Yes or no? That's the way I approach it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Got it.
Hopefully we see you soon.
Great.
Okay, next one for Sue. I also open your mic so you can talk now.
Thank
Hi,
you
Sue.
so much. Yes, I'm here. Thank you, John. A quick question. So what are the tips or like strategies when a student is using AI to help with essay writing?
Well, I think the first thing is, it depends on where you are in the process, right? If this is the brainstorming stage or if I'm editing or, it really depends. But as it relates to like the very beginning of the process for a brainstorm stage, it's like, I'm brainstorming. We have a brainstorm exercise, right? Which triggers to students. Should they be using AI then? No, right? Like this is your own brainstorm. This is your life, right? Like, we don't need any AI at this stage. Now I have some ideas. I have some topics, right? Like, okay, this is about my time at camp. This is the stories, my time at, wherever I went, here's the story. There's different things that have happened. Now, at that point, I would say, we're starting to investigate and filter through these potential stories and ask which ones have good potential. I mean, could you use AI at that point? You could. If I was a student, I would say it would be reasonable to ask to have conversations with AI. I have 4 stories here. This one's about this one's about that, this one's about this. Which one do you think would make a good personal statement? Why? Now, we're not asking so that they can give you the ultimate answer, right? Like it's a large language model. It's giving an answer. It could be the right answer. It might not. It's subjective, obviously, so there is no right answer. But it's triggering you. It's giving you perspectives now about why one might be a good idea over another. And sometimes I read that and I think I do it all the time. And I'll think, oh, the AI didn't understand story 2. It thinks story 1's better because of X, but didn't really understand what I was saying about story 2. What if I tell them what story 2 is about? Then what? Oh, well, that adds a different dimension to it. So there's a conversation that's happening around just the brainstorm. And then we get to the idea like, okay, we have a concept. We could do this. Let's move forward. What happens next? I mean, it depends. Could you ask AI based on the story I just told you, right? Like, if I wanted a good narrative arc, right? And this is, of course, prompting, right? I spent a lot of time thinking about how to prompt and how to write instructions. But, if I wanted a good narrative arc in the story I just told you, what would that look like? What if I started in the middle of the story instead of where it started? How would that change the dynamic? You could play with it, right? And you can start to get a sense. And then you could create an outline. You could say, create an outline and show me section by section how we might build this story. And you could do that too. And then you could start to write, you and say, okay, section 1, intro, I'm going to write it down. I just wrote the first paragraph. And then I would suggest that, that you literally redline yourself. You go back and you read the first paragraph and you say, that first sentence is not very good. It doesn't feel like it's interesting to me. And this whole first paragraph feels like I'm not sure what the theme is. And you can literally write that, right? Like in the comments section, like, don't understand part 1. You wrote it yourself, right? But I don't understand my first sentence. I'm not sure exactly what I meant here. And then you upload that whole thing in AI and you say, let's go through comment by comment and ask you, the AI, how would you deal with the issue identified that the first sentence doesn't make sense? And it tells you, I think it doesn't make sense for this reason. You could justify it that way, and it gives you a sense. And again, you're not getting the right answer. You're getting a perspective of how you might be able to make some changes. I do this all the time. I think I'm a very good writer. I wrote a book, but it takes a lot of mental energy, right, to come up with every single idea or even to see every angle. And so I use AI to kind of alleviate the mental burden of looking at everything so critically, and to give me ideas that I might not just pick up right away. I can identify whether that's going to work, right? But I might not come up with every single idea. So I spend a lot of time interrogating myself, challenging myself. And even when I get to a final thing, I ask, what's wrong with this? What if I did a contrarian way? What if right? Just to keep challenging myself to different ways of thinking. In the end, I think this is about persistence and consistency, using the tool and challenging yourself to think outside the box and letting the tool do that.
Okay, thank you. Next question also, I think I wanted to ask you from Kevin. Is math easier than CS to get in?
Let me just, for the last question, I'll also say, if you did all that and you don't know what you're doing, you still might end up with a bad essay. So it's important that you pay attention to what you're trying to create. Okay, math or CS, I would take math all day. The one thing about math, though, is that if you can, it's kind of like math can either be your intellectual curiosity or it can be your skill set. And so if you're going to apply as math, it needs to be your intellectual curiosity. It's not just I have a good skill set in math. I need to have research and investigation that's mathematical, not just like a data science oriented app where I can show mathematical ability but no intellectual curiosity. That would be data science as opposed to math. CS would be like the hardest because everybody, it's a very large umbrella. Anybody who's artificial intelligence, anyone who likes math, anybody who likes data science, all those people kind of fall under that CS category, which I would stay away from.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have 10 more minutes, 10 minutes. From Emily, as a liberal arts student, when comparing Cornell versus UPenn versus Northwestern versus Duke, how are they culturally different to find the right fit as a ED school for a student?
Well, this is probably a pretty atypical answer, but I would say that other than where they're located, right? Like one's in Ithaca, one's in New York, Philadelphia, right? So there's obviously urban versus rural. There's size differences, right? But in regards to what's the feel of the arts and sciences college at Cornell versus Penn, I would say they feel the same. They're both arts and sciences colleges. They're both liberal learning colleges. The faculty at Cornell are peppered with Penn people, and the same thing, right? Like they see somebody doing something interesting. If you didn't know this already, faculty at these top tier schools are like athletes. Like they're like traded like athletes. They're looked at like a sports team. Like, you know what? They got a great pitcher on that team. They got a great faculty member over at Penn doing X in that department. Bring them in. That's what happens. I was in all those meetings. So they're not sitting there like thinking, wow, Penn's doing something so interesting that we don't have. They're all doing basically everything to attract the top tier students. I would say this is much more marketing, location, et cetera, as opposed to there's an actual fundamental cultural difference between arts and sciences Cornell, arts and sciences Northwestern, arts and sciences Penn. I'd go on location, and that's it. Honestly, I don't think it's that different. Other than the type of human beings who show up, like MIT is very different because it attracts a certain type of kid. Ithaca is different because it attracts a certain type of person who goes to Ithaca, but the actual intellectual experience is very, very similar.
Okay. Can you just repeat? You just mentioned about Cornell, one of the colleges may be taking a little bit lower GPA requirement. Which one?
Well, again, there's no such thing as a requirement, right? But it's your competition, right? Like the college I was referring to is ILR, Industrial Labor Relations, and the reason that they have a lower GPA need, if you will, is because because all the apps that are there, they're not as high a quality. Why? Because do any high school students know what industrial labor relations is? Nobody knows what it is. So, I mean, very few. So you get very limited apps, and of the ones that you get, they're generally not that good. So that creates an opportunity. But it's not like ILR came together and said, you know what, we don't need as high a GPA. It's all based on the competition.
Okay. Sue was asking, do students sign up for your counseling service at personal counseling from John? Yes. If you're signing up with the John right now, what you see is what you get. You will be with him the whole 4 years or 3 years, but he's providing the guidance, structure, and also strategy, but he will have a social consultant to support him on execution side. So just remember, John is the one counseling, give a direction, give a coaching, kind of guide you to do what you need to do for school club, summer time, how to spend, the execution on the personal statement and supplemental essay, everything. You get John. But at the same time, he has somebody to support him, just as a whole package. Okay. How was experience? How was your experience and results with the UPenn MT? I know you have somebody apply for that.
I did, and that student was one of the deferred students. One of the hardest programs in the country. He is very smart and very deserving, but Wharton plus M&T, like you're talking about, like that's like probably the most. I mean, there's a couple PLME at Brown, right? Like we're talking about the most selective schools in the country. Nobody's gonna say like, you know what, all my students get into that program, right? Like it's probably the toughest. I expect this young man to do very well in the RD round, but admittedly he was deferred.
Okay. All right. Thank you, John. I think this question may be asking for. I think. Okay. Do private high school do better than public school this year in earlier round?
Did private than public?
Private high school.
Nothing that like made me think, nothing different than in years past from my perspective. I mean, it's more income driven in my opinion, like kids who don't apply for aid versus as opposed to like public versus private. I mean, the private schools generally are feeder schools, right? So they have pipelines, but I'm saying like nothing's really changed. Generally, it's easier to get in from a top tier private school, but like nothing's changed over the last year or so.
Okay, good. Okay, so we have 5 minutes. I'm going to try to see, one or two questions that last. Thank you, John, for staying so late with us. Right. Okay, the next question for student research, what level of publication stand out? For example, JEI or other journal for high school student or preprints for college application, what would you suggest as practical pathway for students who pursue research besides submitting to ISEF or STS?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can think about research from two angles. You can look at it from this is a illustration of my curiosity, or this is a illustration of my intellectual ability. If I would say most of the time I'm trying to use it as an illustration of your intellectual curiosity, the question, right? The investigation, the interviews, the advocacy, that creates the story. Now, in the STEM spaces, sometimes it's harder to differentiate yourself simply through a story. And now you need to show through your intellectual ability through research. The easiest would be through competition. But if we take that aside for a moment and we say we're going to do it through publication, then I would say like, the colleges, if you walked into a top tier school and said, list all the journals, or if I just listed all the journals and then told them to identify how rigorous it is to get into one of those journals, most of them wouldn't know the answer, right? They don't really know the depth of that. So I guess what I would say is that in most instances, if it's a high level, it's an undergraduate, like you submit to Stanford's undergraduate journal, like they'll recognize that. But some of the journals that require multiple submissions and reviews, like you need to contextualize that to get your intellectual ability side being shared in a meaningful way in the additional information section. So I've had students submit to journals. They've been rejected 3 times. This was the process. And we kind of detailed concisely that this was the challenge of getting published. This was the response they got, and this is the way they fixed it, so they could see this as an intellectual achievement as opposed to intellectual curiosity. There is no master list that would say these publications show and these don't. I think that there's very few things that actually exist that way, but your job is to contextualize it and say, this is a rigorous journal, requires this level of review. I had to submit multiple times, and to kind of contextualize it in that way, that would be meaningful. Your job is to provide them all the information to make a good decision. And in many instances, you should not assume that they know. Most of them don't know. They read by context.
Thank you. The last question for tonight. If your question have not been answered, I apologize for that. I am so sorry. We just don't have enough time. If something you're seriously considering to seeking further explanation or further discussion with John about your child, you can scan the barcode on the right-hand side, fill the form, very simple, couple minutes, and then we will be trying to have a conversation with you, okay? So if I don't get to your question, I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay, last question. How important are the recommendation letter from the school teacher and the counselor? Is it good or bad to have additional recommendation letter from outside of the school?
Well, I would say in most instances, a teacher recommendation or a counselor recommendation 90% of the time, it's not good enough or bad enough to move the needle. It's like they already have a pretty strong opinion of you. They've looked at your transcript. They've looked at your standardized test scores. They've looked at your essays when by the time they get to your letters of recommendation. And so, as I said before, they read by context. They're trying to see, like, is everything I just read, everything I think I know about the student, is this being confirmed in the letter of rec, or is there a red flag? Now, the 10% that are not, that it is good or bad enough to move the needle, I would say when it's good enough, it's because the writer of the recommendation letter used comparative language. I've been teaching for the last 5 years. I've had 155 students. John is like the third most curious person I met, right? That number comparatively seems to move the needle for a lot of readers. On the other side, the other thing that usually hurts you negatively is like when it's most often from feeder schools where you have 20 apps or 50 apps from the same high school, which means that I also have 20 or 50 recommendations from the same counselor, which now I'm like reading them one after another. And so even if I would have read that first one and wouldn't have meant too much to me negatively, if I read 15 other ones and this one tone-wise, length, the verbiage just feels a little different, that can have a negative impact. How important are these? I would say like 90% of the time, it's not that important. 10% of the time, sometimes it pops you positively, sometimes it pops you negatively. The second part of the question is letters of recommendation, which we would refer to as supplemental letters of recommendation, which are not required. I would say they can be helpful. The main thing is intentionality, right? It's not just like people ask me, for example, like, John, can you write the letter of recommendation? And obviously, if I'm the counselor, that would be ridiculous. I'm the one helping you, right? We wouldn't say, I helped the student on this app. But even if I wasn't supporting you on the app, right? Like, well, John, you worked in an Ivy League school. We want you to write the letter of rec. What's the intentionality behind that, right? Like, what do I know? Why would that move the needle based on the story that you told? And the answer is it wouldn't. What would move the needle is, hey, I'm really interested in public economics and I did all this stuff. And my teacher from 9th grade, who's not one of my recommenders, who taught me, whatever, econ or math my first year, I developed a relationship with that person. And over the next 2 or 3 years, I shared with them all of the projects and work that I've had, and they've become an informal mentor. That person's going to write me a letter, supplemental letter of rec, indicating the uniqueness of the relationship that was developed and the uniqueness of the depth of curiosity that you've shown. That can be a powerful supplemental letter of rec, and you could get that from a Boy Scout leader or a manager at a job, someone who's showing something connected to what you said in the app that illustrates your potential for contribution. But you don't want just, hey, here's a US senator who doesn't know you, but your dad contributed to the campaign. They're going to write you a letter of rec. That's not going to do anything. You want something connective that intentionality you can say, I can see why that would further my story within the context of what I'm already telling. If that makes sense?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I just want to quickly kind of mention to whoever the audience and parents left in the circle, 11 o'clock, we still have 175 people with us. I just want to quickly say, John has a product called Blueprint. John talked about tonight, meaning for very, very reasonable price. If you answer some of the questions, come to me and Allison. You answer some of the questions John is indicating on the form. John will be generating, as IvyCompass team, we can generating we call blueprint, meaning John will talk about based on the information he gathered and how you're going to plan in your 4 years or 3 years. So that's something also can be a starter by deeply understanding John's method, right? John has his own very unique method. So that blueprint product could be something to help you make decision to think, if you can follow that plan, the blueprint by John, then maybe you can do something meaningful for your child application. If you don't able to do DIY, then you come to John for further handholding consultation, the package. Okay, so I just want to mention there. Also, IvyCompass, we talked about it. We have not doing that yet. Allison and also John, we have discussion in the future month when we have enough time. If you wanted to come to us, IvyCompass, us, to give us your information, John may be doing another presentation, have a real case, maybe 3 or 4 students. Based on the information we're gathering, he will do a case analysis, meaning the whole presentation will be mainly on the real case, real student have not working with us as signed student yet, John can talk about in that presentation about, so if you're interested in that in the coming month, you can also reach out to me and Allison. So 2 advertisement for the future. One's blueprint, another one is presentation on the real case. So you can bring your child information to us, and then John will be not saying anybody's name. We're anonymous, and then John can tell you what he will do if he have you come to him as a student to work with him, what he would think to have a strategy on your case. Okay. All right.
Also, can I just add that
Yes.
if you're okay with it not being anonymous, and then we could actually have a back and forth, and I could ask you questions during the presentation. I know some people want to do that, but just throwing that out there, if anyone's like, hey, I'm fine to do it, it would make it a really impactful session for you if I could actually ask questions live, but just throwing that out there.
Excellent. Thank you for that add-on. Yeah, if any parents or any student wanted to have that period of time during the conversation, during the presentation with John, have that kind of type of dialogue, I am sure you're going to learn so much from what John's going. John doesn't hold back. He does not afraid of people copying him because he outgrow himself all the time. I just see him learning all the time. So anyway, so if you want to have that session, also reach out to me and Allison, and then we'll be happy to make that arrangement in the future coming month. Okay, thank you very much, John, again, for a wonderful, very, very huge, rich content. Lot of knowledge shared. I know I always have to listen in you several times. By listening to 100 meetings does not mean I still a elementary school student compared to what I learned from your field. So continue learning. Anyway, thank you for your time. Thank you for your presence, and thank you for your energy. Thank you for your knowledge and also dedication. And thank you, Allison, behind the scene for technical support. And thank you for everybody accompanying us on Friday night and learning the knowledge and have a helpful ground for your student to blossom. So let's looking forward to next session. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
And Sophia, thank you for emceeing. Much appreciated. This was a great session.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
John.
Bye-bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone. We can stop recording, Allison. Allison, do you want to put your name and my name on it so when people are interested in the blueprint, they can reach to us? Are you there, Allison?
So we can actually turn the Zoom off, right?
Okay. Yeah, if anyone interested to reach out to us for that coming up presentation and also blueprint, you can put your WeChat there. Can you put your WeChat there so people can reach out to you and me for that kind of type of
service? You guys can join the WeChat group, and we will let you guys know when we're gonna do the next webinar.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will have a form to let you guys to fill out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.